There has to be an element of choice in all video games. At the very least, I have no interest in a game if it decides I'm simply on a theme park ride in the same way a traditional Call of Duty campaign takes you on. While choice in gameplay is a necessity to me, choice in story is more complicated. As players, we are positioned as members of the story because we are active participants, and with that comes a feeling of ownership over the narrative. But on the other side, a story has been written and developed by a studio that may not have accounted for your input into that narrative. Even if choices are included within a game, it's not guaranteed that the feature will result in any meaningful changes. So in today's video, I want to analyze different games that use choices in what I deem as either good or bad ways, and how I think storytelling within video games that include choices can be improved. First and foremost, I want to talk about the role of choice in gameplay. Because for weeks now, I've seen all of these people talking about Hitman 3, and I've just been looking for an excuse to do the same. The games I most consistently want to play are the ones that are defined by choices within gameplay. I want systems, and I want tools that allow me to explore the game on my own terms. For this reason, I consider stealth games one of my favorite genres. If we look at the first level of Dubai in Hitman 3, this freedom is on display. I've played the mission around 5 times already, each time playing it differently. The way I traditionally play Hitman is by switching from disguise to disguise, just making sure that I can be someone that is allowed to walk around in each area. And from there, I also typically try to complete one of the mission stories or challenges. And it was around the 3rd time that I completed it, and I got the challenges ticking off, and I scrolled through the menu of challenges for the location. I saw that one of them is complete everything in just your suit. And I was so excited because I'm a moron. I had been so fixated on my general Hitman tendencies that it didn't even occur to me that I could do a pure stealth approach like this. It's so simple, and it's the thing that anyone who looks at Hitman points to. And then here I am. The guy I work with there is suspicious, but he just sees me walk in there, and he has to hear something going on here. Whatever way you've been doing things, there are nearly infinite approaches beyond that. Hitman is a natural story creator because when you take off the training wheels of the mission story, you are completing each level in a way that is entirely unique to you. This concept in game development is known as emergent gameplay. I became aware of this recently because of a great YouTube channel, Game Maker's Toolkit. He can brief you more on the actual development details. But the concept lies in games have systems that see each other and interact, rather than every system only interacting with the player. I've also been listening to the audiobook of Lost in a Good Game by Pete Etchells. In chapter 3, he asked a question, why do we play video games? And the most insightful part to me was the study he references from the University of Rochester that examined this question. In the best way that I can paraphrase, the experiment used focus groups and had them play different types of games, like Zelda Ocarina of Time versus the Bugs Life game. And the finding that was reinforced was a game like Zelda that was more system-based and you could get better at, made people enjoy it more and feel more intrinsic motivation to play it. I think this gets at the heart as to why I love games with emergent gameplay that require me to make decisions. It's important for players to feel like they are developing themselves within the game world, and that's what emergent gameplay allows for. And that's what I love so much about it. In accordance with my preferences, Hitman does everything I want in the gameplay department. In the story department, that's a different story. I'd say it's actually kind of bad, but I beat it anyway just so that I can say I did. I think this is pretty common though, that a game reliant on your exploration of gameplay systems can struggle with telling a coherent story around them because the player controls the pace. To that I say, go whole hog, go full RPG, let me control the story as well, but we get into a whole new, complicated conversation from there. Fallout New Vegas is a masterpiece. Now, I actually didn't always think that. I was blinded by Fallout 3 nostalgia, which I do love the game for its inherent quality, but it came into my life at exactly the right time. I was a preteen with no concept for RPGs who had just been thrown into a world that seemed endless. This game is still pretty cool. Just while getting footage for this, I came across this town I've never found before where they think they're in Virginia and they're super nice, so I punched them to death. And I unlocked their basement to find out that they're just cannibals. The early parts of the game were my favorite, especially the story of Megaton. The ugly hunk of sheet metal was built under the belief that this giant bomb was a god.
A divine event occurs, and trillions upon trillions of new universes are created.
Which is not only an awesome concept for a society, but you could also talk to a shady suit man and think about blowing it up.
Resident of this putrescent cesspool.
I've played the game multiple times, and each time I choose a different path for the fun of it. That quest and the starting areas of the game also expose you to Tenpenny Tower, a skyscraper in the wasteland that shows a high-class world reminiscent of old life. It's the bastards here that actually want to blow up Megaton for the lulz. I would reload my save at Tenpenny Tower over and over again just to test out different assassinations on Alistair Tenpenny.
Brutality! What brutality!
Let's just stop and appreciate that this man's getting out of bed and he's ready to just try and quickscope me.
I do enjoy it.
I warn you, pulling out the Ripper is not for the faint of heart. My desire to dethrone rich old guys was evident even when I was 12. My youthful perception of Fallout 3 was that this scary and intimidating world could be mastered, and that I could control the story within it. Now that's a flawed reading of Fallout 3 because the game that actually does that is Fallout New Vegas. I was just too dense to realize it. There's an hour-and-a-half video by HBomberGuy, which is a level of video game criticism I could only dream of creating.
Then she decides to delete the computer records. The person you optionally saved as a result of exploring wants to delete the data you actually came here for. If you already downloaded it, she asks you to delete your copy too, so this mistake can't be repeated. And if you refuse, she attacks you. Even simple-seeming fetch quests have twists and the sense of a story you're taking part in and making choices about. Because there's a real moral dilemma here. Do you really trust this guy with research that killed a bunch of people already?
But it successfully unlocked my brain from nostalgia. Astoundingly, despite my preferences for Fallout 3, I've played New Vegas anywhere from like 5 to 7 times. It's a vastly more replayable game. Every side quest presents you with a ton of choices, and the main story can end in so many different ways. Fallout New Vegas is a near perfect execution of player as protagonist. The game is prepared for nearly any decision you make. People you kill or bridges you burn nearly always have a failsafe. We've all come across the NPCs in Fallout 3 or 4 where murder is not an option. And folks, that's something you don't want to say to a gamer. Obsidian's version of the game is always ready. Beyond the minutia that comes with players' murderous appetite, the main questline is structured in a way that makes you the most crucial part of the story. You can live out your main character complex in this story because you are more than simply a participant within the story. You drive the story. Conventionally, in literature, there can be a difference between main character and the protagonist. The main character is the lens through which the story is experienced, while the protagonist is the character who propels the story forward. I think far too often video games can place you in a fake role, one where you're given the illusion of choice, but ultimately, you play no role in the story that has already been determined by the creators. There's a flip side to this as well. The flip side is the type of linear game that may include a choice just for the sake of it. GTA 4 and 5 are especially guilty of this sin. I was furious at the end of GTA 5 when I was forced to choose the fate of certain characters on my in-game cell phone for literally no other reason than to distribute my money differently. GTA 5 is included on a Watch Mojo list on the dumbest decisions in video games. Watch Mojo isn't exactly a bulletproof source for an argument, but if they're making a top 10 about something like this, it probably means a lot of games are guilty of it. Both GTA 4 and 5 give you a random decision shoehorned on the end of the game that somehow decides whether or not someone dies. Given the fact that choice is never really something included in these stories, the decisions being brought up makes me angry every time. Fallout New Vegas is the perfect balance of all of these elements. You are the protagonist because your choices and abilities are the key cog in determining the ending of the story. Your relationship with the factions and the alliances you form or dissolve determine the political fate of the Mojave Wasteland. The choices are also earned. You aren't getting a little text blurb on your Pip-Boy asking how you're going to determine the Battle of Hoover Dam before it happens. You have to work for it. Work needs to be put into relationships with their favorite faction, and further work must be done to ensure their ability to win the battle. None of this cheap BS at the end of the game. Character progression leads to decision, which leads to story progression, and in the end, the story that results is one crafted by you as the protagonist. Fallout New Vegas has the perfect choice-driven ending because it's all around one of the most prevalent questions in society. What kind of government do you want? It's a game that doesn't lose its critical appeal due to choices because it knows what its message is. If you've ever taken that political compass quiz, you have essentially played the ending of Fallout New Vegas, and it is brilliant. New Vegas manages to be an affecting experience that analyzes how a struggling society could conceivably be reestablished under different political philosophies. Obsidian's authorial vision was not only able to survive in the face of player choice, it was clearly constructed with the choices in mind. New Vegas overcomes what I think a lot of choice-driven games run into. It's always the ending that gets bungled. The ending is either something like all roads lead to Rome, but because you're a bad guy, these bad things happened, and good things happened because good guy. And then the flip side of that takes your choices way too much into consideration, where it's like bad guy means everybody dies, and good guy means everyone lives happily ever after. Both of these, I think, are thoroughly uninteresting conclusions. One scenario is far too afraid to veer from that authored vision that exists on the developer end, and the other scenario is too afraid to not take your choices into consideration. There's a medium here, and developers can struggle to find that tightrope that they need to walk, but there has to be something in between. My choices can't be discredited that I made throughout, and my experience as a player can't be discredited. But the developer also needs to have vision so that the project doesn't go completely off the rails at the end. So if you watched my channel at all before, you know that I'm completely obsessed with the medium of video games as a storytelling medium. It drives me nuts, the cinematic craze in games, because I think it goes against using the medium of video games to tell stories. I think you're just kind of copying from that point on. And I especially want to see a new wave of storytelling take place in mainstream gaming. I know that it happens in the indie space, but I want to see like these developers that are getting a ton of money do something with it. When you think of the practical, critical point of view of analyzing a video game, especially when it's choice driven, it's much more difficult. Compare it to a book or a movie. This is essentially one text that you have to analyze. You can have different readings of that text, but ultimately everyone is pulling from the same thing. But then when you're getting into video games and two different players are having two completely different experiences, it becomes a lot more difficult to analyze. And from that standpoint, it also becomes more difficult to write. That's why I'm so disappointed with a lot of these stories. But I think when it's done right, like New Vegas is, it can have equally as much impact as, say, a Metal Gear Solid does. Kojima is praised for his analysis of politics in his stories. Why isn't Fallout New Vegas praised? I think what they do so right is that by providing this political litmus test for players, they then interpret what your choices were. They reverse it. It's not us interpreting their text. They interpret the text that you just created at the end, and that is how they leave their developer imprint on the story. It's my belief, more just theorizing, that choice-driven games have to be united under some sort of philosophy like that. The developer needs to know their point of view, and then they have to take the choices that a player has made and interpret it from there. I want to open it up. I want to know what you guys think. Some choice-driven games I didn't bring up that you think are either really good or bad. Don't spoil Disco Elysium for me. I think it will really go under this category, and I want to play the director's cut when it comes out, so be kind. So comment your thoughts, let me know what you think. Like the video if you like it. That's my final request to you. Because if people want to watch this video, they're more likely to find it if you like it, therefore that helps me out. But if you don't want to miss any of my future videos, I lied. I have one more thing to ask you. Be sure to subscribe, so then you do not miss those when I come back next time.